Behind Nell Blaine's ravishing paintings of Gloucester Harbor and bouquets of flowers lies a surprising, even shocking, artistic and personal journey. Blaine was born in 1922 in Richmond, Virginia. She claimed she knew before she started school that she wanted to be an artist. Her father died when she was 16, and at 19, to her mother's fierce objections, Blaine went off to New York City. Abstraction charged the New York art world at the time, and Blaine desperately wanted to be part of it. At 20, she was studying with Hans Hofmann, the renowned expressionist painter and teacher. Abstraction consumed her, particularly the work of Mondrian. In a 1967 Archives of American Art interview, Blaine said of Mondrian, "What really interested me was basic vertical and horizontal relationships and the equilibrium, and then this very clean, fresh air that he seemed to have. I was really completely in love with Mondrian, the whole business." The jazz scene was as important to Blaine as painting then. Charlie Parker, Dizzy Gillespie. She briefly married saxophonist Bob Bass. Rhythm was then and would remain critical to all her painting. Blaine was at the center of this new vitalized culture. At 23, she had her first solo exhibition in New York City. The seminal modern art critic Clement Greenberg championed her. Peggy Guggenheim's art buyer, Howard Putzel, described her work as the hope of American painting. And she was the youngest member of the group called American Abstract Artists. Blaine admitted she was too abstract then even for Hans Hofmann. Also in 1943, Blaine and her husband made a first trip to Gloucester, Massachusetts. In spite of this radical success, Blaine knew she was missing a large piece of an artist's education. In 1950, at 28, divorced by then, Blaine made her first trip to Europe. On reflection, she said she was already starting to move away from abstraction, but Paris, the sheer beauty of it, completed this transformation. In the Archives interview, Blaine said this, "I began to feel the greatest pleasure in the world was to sit out on the banks of the Seine and draw those scenes. And I was just so taken with the visual, just the look of the city. It's the first beautiful city I had seen, and nature took over, and I realized I had been depriving myself of some wonderful, sensuous pleasure with painting. And I just kind of let go, and my painting changed completely in Paris. I was never so happy. I realized I closed the door to some part of painting." With that European trip, Blaine began the complete transition to figurative work, which would remain her essence. And she credits a later trip to Oaxaca, Mexico in 1957 for permanently intensifying the light and color in her paintings. Blaine joined what became called the second generation New York painters, who were responding to abstraction with a new figuration. Her new work was just as well received. She exhibited broadly, solo and group shows at the Tibor Donaghey Gallery, the Poindexter Gallery, and many others. Her friend group included poets and collaborators John Ashbery and Kenneth Koch. She had fellowships at the MacDowell and Yaddo art colonies. But in 1959, fate abruptly and dramatically took a swipe at her. On a successful painting trip to Greece on the island of Mykonos, Blaine contracted bulbar spinal polio. It is speculated she caught it from swimming in polluted water. Within days, she was being airlifted to an American military hospital and placed in an iron lung. Blaine would spend the rest of her life in a wheelchair, dependent on caregivers, particularly her partner, Carolyn Harris. With her right arm almost immobile, Blaine would relearn to paint with her left as dominant. But what is truly remarkable is that polio seemed to barely slow Blaine down. The very next year, the artist had 2 solo exhibitions and was included in 2 group shows. In that decade, she would travel extensively, work again at Yaddo, and spend more summers painting in Gloucester. According to her biographer, Martika Sawin, Blaine's life was actually one of confinement, dependence, pain, and anxiety. But her work remained meticulous, lush, and bold. Blaine would continue to say it all goes back to Mondrian, the push and pull of color and the energy created by that tension across a plane connects directly to Mondrian's squares. Blaine lived on Riverside Drive in New York City since her illness, but in 1974, at the age of 52, she received a Guggenheim Award and she purchased a summer home in Gloucester with a view of the harbor. Blaine would continue to travel and paint, particularly to Austria, where she inherited property from a friend, but it was difficult. She needed her subjects to come to her more often. In a way, flowers became for Blaine what bottles were to the artist Morandi. Accessible material to return to over and over again that never ceased to teach about the honesty of space. Table settings were accessible material which she often painted into the quiet of the night. As experimentations with pattern and the emotion of color, these works summon the interiors of the French painter Bonnard. As her wheelchair allowed, Blaine went down the hill from her home to the harbor, a subject which revealed to her, as her biographer says, light as energy. Nell Blaine died in 1996 at 74 years old in New York City after a surgery and complications from the polio. Her works hang in major museums from the Whitney to the Smithsonian. Her paintings can sometimes seem deceptively simple, but so can Mondrian's. There are years of looking and thinking behind these works. The abstraction is there in tension, in composition. But Gloucester is there too. Because, as Nell Blaine learned in France, the world is just too beautiful not to paint it.